I stepped off the dropship onto the cracked and barren ground of Kyreth 7. The air was thick with dust, carrying the scent of something old, something forgotten. The ruins stretched before me, jagged stone remnants of a civilization lost to time. Faded engravings marked the walls, whispers of a language no human had yet deciphered. The twin suns hung low in the sky, their dying light casting long, fractured shadows over the desolate landscape. Behind me, the others disembarked in clusters, murmuring among themselves. Scientists in their sterile uniforms, corporate surveyors, scanning the terrain with greedy eyes, and hardened mercenaries shifting uneasily, fingers twitching near their weapons. They had been sent here for different reasons, some to study, some to claim, and some to ensure that no one interfered with either. I had come for my own reasons, though even I couldn't quite define them yet. Then I saw her. She stood alone near the ruins, draped in fabric that shimmered strangely despite the dust swirling in the air. Her form was humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Taller than a human, with elongated limbs that moved with a predatory grace. Her skin, a deep bronze with a faint iridescent sheen, caught the light in ways that made her seem almost unreal. But it was her face that captured my attention. The scar ran from her left cheekbone down along her jaw, curling around her throat like a brand from some forgotten god. It was not fresh, not something earned in recent battle. It had healed long ago, but the flesh was marked in a way that made it seem like the wound had never truly closed, as if it was not just a scar, but a message. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The moment the others laid eyes on her, a ripple of unease passed through them. It started with the scientists, one of them gasped, a trembling hand rising to cover his mouth. The corporate types froze mid-step, their greedy calculations momentarily forgotten. Even the mercenaries, men and women who had seen horrors across 100 worlds, took a step back. The lead scientist, an older man with grey streaking his temples, turned sharply, his voice tight. "We should go." The others didn't argue. They started retreating, feet crunching hurriedly against the dry ground, hands shaking as they reached for their communicators. The dropship crew, sensing the sudden tension, moved quickly to prepare for an early departure. No one spoke directly to her. No one asked why she was there. They just saw the scar and turned away. I remained. She watched me, her golden eyes unreadable, as the rest of my kind fled like frightened animals. The air between us stretched, thick with something unspoken. I could feel her measuring me, waiting to see if I too would run, but I had never been the running type. The silence stretched between us as the others retreated. Their hurried footsteps crunched against the dry ground, their voices hushed but urgent as they boarded the dropship. I could hear the engines humming back to life, the telltale whine of thrusters preparing for takeoff. No one looked back. No one questioned their own fear. They simply accepted it, the way animals instinctively flee from a predator lurking in the tall grass. I turned my gaze back to her. She hadn't moved. The wind kicked up small eddies of dust between us, whipping at the fabric draped over her frame, but she remained utterly still. Her golden eyes never left me, unreadable yet piercing, like she was peeling back my skin to see what lay beneath. I still didn't understand why the others had reacted the way they had. I had seen countless aliens before, on war-torn battlefields, and in the shining halls of intergalactic councils. I had fought beside them, against them, traded with them, cursed at them. I had seen creatures that defied explanation, beings of shifting light, sentient machines, monstrous titans from the void between stars. And yet this woman, This lone figure, standing in the ruins of her lost civilization, had sent an entire group of seasoned professionals scrambling back to their ship without a second thought. A low voice crackled over my earpiece. It was the lead scientist speaking in a rushed whisper. "Get back on the ship now, we are leaving." I glanced over my shoulder. The ramp was still down, the crew standing by, waiting for me to board. I could see the nervous flicker in their eyes. They didn't want to leave a man behind, but they weren't going to wait forever. I exhaled, turning my attention back to the alien woman. "What is it about you that makes them so afraid?" I asked, half to myself, half to her. She tilted her head slightly, the closest thing to an acknowledgement. The wind stirred again, carrying her scent, something sharp, almost metallic, but not unpleasant. The scientist's voice returned, more urgent now. "You don't understand that scar. She's marked. You need to—" I cut him off. "I don't give a damn about superstition." A sudden ripple passed through the remaining crew. One of the mercenaries, a broad-shouldered woman with scars of her own, muttered, "He's lost it," before disappearing up the ramp. The rest of them followed. The hatch sealed with a hiss, and just like that the ship lifted off, kicking up a storm of dust in its wake. I raised an arm to shield my face, feeling the heat of the thrusters against my skin. Then silence. They were gone, and I was alone, alone with her. For the first time since I stepped off that ship, she moved. Not a step forward or back, just a shift, a slight lowering of her shoulders, a change so small it barely registered, but I caught it. Amusement. "You are different," she said at last. Her voice was low, rough-edged, like it hadn't been used in a long time. I smirked, dusting off my jacket. "You have no idea." She studied me in silence, her golden eyes sharp with curiosity. But there was something else there too, calculation. She wasn't just looking at me. She was measuring me as if trying to determine whether I was worth acknowledging or if I would turn and run like the others, just delayed by some foolish human bravado. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the faint scent of old stone, and something metallic, something ancient. The twin suns were lower now, casting deep, eerie shadows across the crumbling structures. This place felt like a graveyard, not just of a civilization, but of something bigger, something that had never truly died. Still, I didn't move. She was the first to break the silence. "Why don't you run?" I folded my arms. "Why should I?" Her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You saw what they saw." "I saw a scar." She huffed, though whether it was amusement or disbelief I couldn't tell. "And that means nothing to you?" I shrugged. "A scar is a scar. It means you survived something." That caught her attention. Her gaze flickered, something shifting in those golden irises, something deeper than just curiosity. "Survival?" she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. I nodded. "Yeah, whatever happened to you, you made it through. That's what matters." For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair, and I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched slightly against the fabric of her robe. Finally, she exhaled and took a step closer. "You think like a warrior," she said. I smirked. "I've been called worse." She studied me again, this time with something closer to approval. "Most would not." "Stand before the Tyrask." "The Tyrask?" She traced the edge of her scar absently, her fingers running along the ridges as if they still ached. "It is what my people called this mark. It means forsaken, cursed. It is a brand given only to those deemed unworthy of life." Something cold settled in my gut. "They did this to you?" She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. I clenched my jaw. I had seen a lot of things in my time, seen the worst of what people could do to each other in the name of power, in the name of purity, in the name of belief. It never sat right with me, never would. "They feared me," she continued, voice quieter now. "They feared what I represented." I didn't look away. "And what was that?" She met my gaze, and for the first time I saw something raw beneath her composure. Not just anger, not just pain, defiance. Change. A slow grin spread across my face. "Now that," I said, "is something I can respect." For the first time, she almost smiled. She sat on the edge of a broken pillar, the stone worn smooth by time, and ran her fingers over the jagged edges of her scar. The suns were sinking lower now, staining the sky in deep oranges and bruised purples. Shadows stretched long across the ruins, making them feel less like a dead place and more like something asleep, something waiting. I sat across from her, resting my arms on my knees. I didn't press her to continue. I'd learned a long time ago that silence could be just as powerful as words. If she wanted to speak, she would, and if she didn't, I wasn't going to pry. Finally, she exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry years of weight. "This is not a wound of battle," she said, her voice low, steady. "It is a mark of survival." I nodded, saying nothing. She traced the scar absently, as if the act of remembering made it burn again. "My people believed that fate was written in flesh, that those born with the Tirask were destined to bring ruin, to unravel the order that had kept us in balance for centuries. It did not matter who I was or what I had done. The moment they saw it, they decided my fate for me." I frowned. "That's a hell of a thing to believe." She glanced at me, amusement flickering in her golden eyes. "Your kind is no stranger to such beliefs. I have studied humans. There was a time when you, too, feared those who were different, when you cast them out, labeled them as dangerous because it was easier than accepting change." She wasn't wrong. I had seen it in history books. I had seen it firsthand. The way fear twisted people, made them blind. It was easier to push something away than to try and understand it. "So what happened?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke again. "Tradition demanded that I be cast out. But exile was not enough. They wished to make an example of me, to show that fate could not be defied." Her fingers tightened against the fabric of her robe. The scar was their proof. They marked me before they left me to die. A slow anger coiled in my chest. I had seen cruelty before, but there was something especially vile about condemning someone before they even had a chance to prove themselves. "But you didn't die." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "No, I did not." I studied her, the way she held herself, not just with strength, but with something more. She had survived, not because she had been spared, but because she had refused to break. "They were wrong about you," I said. Her gaze met mine, searching. "Perhaps." She looked away, the wind stirring her hair. "Or perhaps they were right, and I will be the thing that destroys what they built." I grinned. Maybe destruction isn't always a bad thing. This time she didn't look away. The ruins whispered around us, the wind carrying the echoes of a lost civilization. I could feel it now, something beneath the surface, something waiting. The others had fled without looking back, but they had made a mistake. They hadn't stayed long enough to see the truth. She sat across from me, her golden eyes flickering in the dying light, her fingers still absently running over the scar that had shaped her fate. But now, as I looked past it, past the mark, past the fear it inspired in the others, I saw something else. The ruins weren't just remnants of a forgotten people. They were alive. She noticed my gaze drifting toward the carvings on the stone near us. They glowed faintly now, pulsing with energy I hadn't seen before. I reached out, running my fingers over the ancient symbols. They were smooth, too perfect, to have been worn by time. They feared change, she said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. They feared what I represented. I turned back to her. And what was that? Her gaze didn't waver. A future they could not control. The symbols pulsed again, and a low hum vibrated through the ground beneath us. I tensed, my instinct screaming at me to move, to prepare for something unseen. But she remained still. She wasn't afraid. I watched her carefully. They didn't just mark you because they thought you were cursed, did they? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. She exhaled slowly, as if the truth itself was something heavy. I was meant to inherit this place. My bloodline carried knowledge that was not meant to be forgotten. But power in the wrong hands is dangerous. Her fingers traced the carvings and the glow brightened beneath her touch. And they were afraid of what I would uncover. It clicked then. The ruins, the fear in the others, the reason they turned away without question. This place is more than just a graveyard, I murmured. It's a vault, she nodded. A vault of knowledge they wanted buried, knowledge they tried to erase, but it does not sleep. Her voice grew softer, almost reverent. It remembers. The realization sent a chill down my spine. The others hadn't run because of superstition alone. They had felt it too, even if they couldn't name it. This place wasn't dead, it was waiting, and now, with her return, it was waking up. I looked at her, a slow grin forming. You know, humanity has a bad habit of digging up things other people try to bury. For the first time, she almost smiled. Then perhaps you were meant to be here? The carvings flared suddenly, bathing us in a golden glow. The air around us seemed to hum with something unseen, something ancient and vast. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going anywhere. The ruins came alive around us. The glow from the carvings pulsed in rhythm with something deep beneath the surface, something old and vast. The air felt charged, humming with energy that prickled against my skin like the static before a storm. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate, reverent. This was no surprise to her, no accident. She had known something like this would happen. I rose to my feet as well, my instincts screaming at me to stay alert. "What's happening?" she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, pressing her palm against one of the glowing symbols. The stone beneath her hand rippled like water, and suddenly the ruins didn't feel like ruins anymore. They built this place as a safeguard, she said at last, a repository of knowledge, a weapon, a warning, but in time they feared what it held. They feared what it meant. Her golden eyes flickered toward me. So they tried to bury it, and they tried to bury me with it. I exhaled, glancing at the carvings now shifting before my eyes. The shapes, once unreadable, now made an eerie kind of sense, as though the meaning had been there all along, just waiting for recognition. And now, she took a slow breath. Now it remembers. The humming grew deeper, vibrating through. The ground beneath us, small bits of debris trembled, skittering across the stone. Something was coming awake. I glanced at her scar again, understanding dawning. The others hadn't fled because of the mark itself. They had fled because of what it represented. A key. A link to whatever had been locked away here. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "You stayed?" I smirked. "I did." Her gaze held mine for a long moment, searching. "Then you should know," she said finally. "There is no turning back." I nodded. I don't like turning back. Anyway, the stone beneath us gave a low, resonant groan, like something ancient, shifting in its sleep. The light from the carvings began to swirl now, flowing like liquid gold across the surfaces of the ruins, stretching out in intricate patterns. It was activating. A deep sound, more felt than heard, echoed through the air. It sent a shiver down my spine. I flexed my fingers, every nerve on edge. "Tell me one thing," I said, watching as the ruins lit up around us. "Are we waking something that should stay buried?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her hand more firmly against the glowing stone, watching as the symbols spun and shifted. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but certain. "No." She turned to me, her golden eyes burning with something fierce, something unstoppable. "We are waking something that was never meant to be forgotten." And with that, the ruins let out a deep, resounding pulse, one that shook the very bones of the world. The pulse reverberated through the ruins, a deep, resonant sound that I felt more in my bones than in my ears. The symbols, once dormant carvings in dead stone, blazed to life, their golden light spilling across the ground, winding through the cracks, illuminating paths that had not been walked in centuries. She stood still in the center of it all, unshaken. I could see it in her posture, the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides. This was not fear. This was purpose. I stepped closer, watching her carefully. "What happens now?" she exhaled, her breath steady, controlled. "Now, the truth is revealed." The ground beneath us shifted, not a violent quake, but something deeper, like the planet itself was stirring from slumber. Ahead of us, the largest ruin, a crumbling archway of blackened stone, began to change. The light slithered up its surface, filling the gaps where time had carved away pieces of its structure, and then with a sound like grinding metal, the space within the archway turned black. No, not black. Empty. A void, swallowing the light around it, deep and endless. Instinct had me reaching for my weapon, but she lifted a hand slightly, not to stop me, but to reassure. "This is not a weapon." I kept my eyes on the swirling abyss. "Then what is it?" She stepped toward it, the golden glow reflecting against her skin. "A doorway." The words settled heavily between us. A doorway? To where? To what? The others had turned back before they could reach this moment, but now I understood why. This wasn't just superstition, it wasn't just fear of a woman marked by fate. It was the fear of what lay beyond. I swallowed, my pulse steady despite the unknown. "And you're just going to step through?" She turned to me, her expression unreadable. Yet something in her gaze told me that this moment had been a long time coming. I was exiled because of what I might become? Because they feared I would. Return here and open what they tried to seal away. The wind howled around us, carrying the weight of something ancient, something waiting. She held my gaze. "I will not let their fear define me." I nodded slowly. There was something about her, something relentless, something inevitable. She was not afraid. And neither was I. So, I said, rolling my shoulders, what do you think we'll find on the other side? Her lips quirked slightly, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from her yet. Only one way to find out. She turned, stepping forward into the void. I didn't hesitate. The others had turned back. They had let fear dictate their path, but I wasn't like them. I took a breath and followed her through the doorway into the unknown.